All right. Welcome to people as you load in to this next exciting webinar Wednesday. We're just going to wait a minute, let people load in a bit. Again, if you are just logging in, we're just waiting for all of the participants that have signed up and registered for this to load in. If you're wondering where Cisco Kevin, who am I, where am I broadcasting from? My car. I thought it would be kind of unique for people who obviously are on the go nowadays to do it from a place basically where a lot of people do business now, just in remote areas. So okay, what do we got here? Still loading, but it looks like it's slowing down now. So I'm going to get going. All right. Well, welcome to this webinar Wednesday, all about the shifting industry and understanding how food service will fundamentally change. Really excited to have our guest, Maeve Webster. It's kind of hard because this bio is like, I just literally want to share with you guys every detail. She has so much experience, 17 years as a food service specialist. During the past decade, she was a senior director at Data Essentials, and that is where a lot of the industry data comes from when we're analyzing trends or sharing data with you about where things are going. She also helped develop several of Data Essentials' new products. She's also been part of like so many experiences, flavors, yes. She's her MBA, no chilling. Cisco Kevin here. I'm broadcasting from Winnipeg, and she is coming to you live from Vermont right now. So without further ado, I just want to remind a couple other people on the right hand, you will find the chat box. We'd like, if you're going to ask questions, please ask questions from the chat box on the right. We'd prefer if you don't use the Q&A, just so we've got all the questions coming through. And now I'm going to hand things over to Maeve.
All right, great. Thanks, Kevin. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'm very excited to present on this topic. It's one of my favorite topics, largely because so much is going on in the industry that we could speak for probably 2 hours on what direction the industry is going to go in, and we just don't have that time, sadly. But there's a lot of really interesting things to talk about, and I'm going to leave some time at the end for questions, but obviously if questions come up in the middle, don't hesitate to shoot them through, and I'll make sure to take some time to pause and get those questions answered. So without further ado, let's get into this, and let's see if I can get this. There we go. All right, so let's start with agriculture because that's where our industry really starts and all the changes that are happening now with agriculture. When it comes to agriculture and the issues that it's facing, there are many. These are probably the 3 largest issues that the agricultural industry are having to address. Monocultures and the impact on the environment, as well as the challenges that monocultures present. On the left-hand side, this is actually, it's a little hard to tell just because it's so green. But in the foreground, that is actually a monoculture palm oil plantation. And in the background is the jungle, essentially. And I'm sure many of you heard about the fires that were happening in Indonesia. A lot of them were being set as farmers were clearing more land for the palm oil plantations. So that has a whole host of issues attached to it. We've got soil health and the impact of soil health on the ability to produce crops, the consistency of the prices that we're all facing once those crops come to market. There's water management, and very often we talk about droughts, and that's certainly top of mind now in the U.S. with regard to the fires in California and Australia with the fires that they're dealing with. But earlier in the year, we were all dealing with too much water so that farmers couldn't even get the crops in. So all of this is now contributing to an unbelievable amount of innovation that's happening, largely driven by tech innovation and rethinking what farms are going to look like. One of the biggest changes that's afoot, I would say, it's certainly not having a broad impact at the moment, but it's certainly something that a lot of farmers are beginning to look at, is hydroponics and aquaponics as a way to minimize the impact on the land and start more efficiently using resources. It's often done in closed climate indoor facilities, which is also a different type of technology that involves either vertical or horizontal farming. I mean, it all gets very, very complicated. So, but hydroponics and aquaponics are one of them. Aquaponics is really where a lot of this is starting. And for those of you who might not be familiar with that idea, hydroponics is just growing the vegetables in a water base, essentially, and that's it. You're, of course, providing nutrients, but it's just water in the vegetables, and that's what you've got. Aquaponics begin to introduce fish into the system, and the idea there is that fish will help to contribute essentially the terroir flavor to the vegetable that's lost once you actually take the soil out. And of course, they also contribute additional minerals and nutrients to the water. But here's the thing. So this sounds like a wonderful idea. Everybody's happy. The fish are happy. The vegetables are happy. The land's happy. But once you start introducing the fish to the system, have you now finally created a vegetable that is no longer vegan friendly? Have we now created an entire set of produce that would essentially be vegan friendly that's no longer vegan friendly, even though it is earth friendly? So the complicated nature of these changes that we're all talking about and the innovation that's happening are really going to create problems that we haven't even thought about going forward, even though they create some really interesting solutions. So the first question that I have for everyone, largely because I'm interested to hear what side everybody falls on, if vegetables were raised in an aquaponic system that included fish, do you believe, if you're an operator or if you go into a restaurant, if you're vegan, do you think that those are now vegan friendly? Would you consider those vegan friendly produce? I'm kind of curious to see where everybody falls there.
Got one saying yes.
All right. Well,
few yeses, yeah.
A lot of yeses so far.
Yeah.
Usually when I ask this question, so far everybody's leaning a bit on the yes side.
Yep. Yep.
But often when I ask this question, we do have a couple of no's, and often it will become 50-50. So imagine if you are trying to create vegan-friendly options or vegan-friendly menu. Now there's going to be that extra element of trying to understand where your produce or how your produce is grown to ensure that that's the case. Now, another way to look at this, of course, is aquaponics are allowing farmers a completely different stream of revenue than they've ever been able to consider. Superior Fresh, they're based in, say, either Wisconsin or Minnesota or Michigan, just flew out of my head. But at any rate, they're an aquaponic farm. This is their facility. They are not only growing greens, largely lettuce, and a wide variety of them, but they also are getting an extra revenue stream from salmon and cod, I believe, or trout. But so here now you have a farmer who not only is growing a traditional farmer produce crop, but they also are getting additional revenue from fish protein. So I think we're going to see a really interesting diversification in this field, some really interesting and unique options for sourcing. Other issues that are being considered now in agriculture with if you think back to the soil management, there are those individuals, CVI, the Culinary Vegetable Institute in Ohio, they're doing a lot of testing to see if they can change the makeup of the soil. Can they inherently change the nutritional quality of the produce that they are growing? Not by micro amounts, but significantly change the nutritionals. So will that ultimately decommoditize produce? Can you no longer say one carrot is equal to another carrot, and how would that impact the way you design menus and the calorie counts and nutritional information you then are providing, given that you might get a carrot from this farmer over here versus this farmer over here, and they've got incredibly different nutritionals as a result of soil management? So you can see how complex this is going to get. Quickly, with regard to some other innovations happening in agriculture, you've got things like regenerative agriculture, which is really thinking about how to maintain the health of the soil going forward. Agroecology is trying to design farms that create a more biodiverse environment and incorporate natural elements into them so it's less impactful on the overall environment around the farm. You have new crops, and I'm saying new because many of these have been rediscovered, if you will. They haven't been invented in a lab. Terviva on the left, that's the Pongamia tree, which has exponential, I mean, I want to say it's 300 times more biomass than soybeans. So if these can take off, you can get 300 times more product within the exact same footprint. So imagine how that will change farming. In the middle, that's Kernza. It is a perennial grain plant that could replace the need to replant grains every year, thus also maintaining soil health. And on the far right, you've got mankai, which is a duckweed. I'm sure anybody who lives near water has seen that really small microplant that grows on the top of still water. That's actually something you can eat, and that is being used now increasingly as a protein source. And then to blow all of this up, you then start introducing CRISPR technology, which is, if you think about CRISPR versus GMOs, CRISPR is the scalpel to GMOs' blunt edge blade. I mean, GMOs created a lot of solution. They continue, although they are certainly questionable to some people. CRISPR does not merge two genetic species, which is essentially what GMOs are. GMOs are transgenic, so you're combining two gene sources. CRISPR, like I said, is a scalpel that is pulling out little elements within a gene sequence to not so much create new varieties, but to solve for problems. So one of the best examples of that, and this has already been done, is they've used CRISPR to go into cows' DNA, pull out the gene sequence that causes horns to grow so that the cows no longer even grow horns, so they don't have to go through the painful and somewhat traumatizing process of being dehorned to protect both them and the farmer. So that is as far as we know so far, but of course this is a technology that's very, very early days. This can eliminate the gene sequence that might allow for browning, for funguses, certain, plant and bug attacks, and all of these other things that could then eliminate the need for fertilizers and pesticides and all kinds of other things. So CRISPR has the potential to completely rock the world when it comes to agriculture and, quite frankly, almost anything else.
So you can see really quickly, where does the word breeding fall into all this? We had a produce provider who does the close to zero emission internal agriculture, and somebody used the term and she said, no, we don't use GMOs, we breed. So I just where does that, the idea of just putting two things close to each other and seeing what happens, that sort of, where does that fall into this?
Well, that's the original way that farmers dealt with a lot of these issues, and even came up with the new varietals that we're all now very, very familiar with. So, even what we're calling the heirloom, let's say tomatoes, things like mortgage lifter, that was originally bred. It's not like a natural tomato that just existed in nature. So breeding is certainly an option. The challenge with breeding, there are a few challenges. It's not consistent. It takes a little while to get to a consistent strain that you can then get the same results out all the time. Like mortgage lifter took a while to create as a tomato. It also isn't necessarily a guaranteed fix, right? So just because you put two plants next to each other, you're not necessarily going to get the best features out of both those plants in a natural environment. You're not really sure what's going to happen, and it will take a while. So the solution that you might get could also be years and years down the road rather than 2 or 3 months down the road. Okay. So I think that for those farmers who are not interested in going as high tech, that is something that they can still do. It's a very traditional part of the industry. It's just that I think they'll be outpaced very quickly by a lot of the other technological advances eventually. And they may create some really unique options, which will give them certainly a competitive positioning in the marketplace. But I think from a production point of view where they can actually produce enough to be competitive with other farmers who are skewing toward the technological advances, I think they're going to have a hard time keeping up and being competitive. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Any other questions? Yeah? Okay. Right. And I did see there's a note here, most farms use animal manure. That is true. That certainly has not gone away, and a lot of them do, particularly some of the smaller farmers, well, most of the smaller farmers. But you know, animal manure is likely not going to be the only option, and particularly from a large corporate point of view, that becomes a little bit more challenging because then you have to have a lot of animals to provide enough animal manure. So I think you can rely on that from a smaller production point of view, but it's going to be a little more challenging from a larger production point of view. So before I get, okay, so now we're going to talk about lab-based foods. So we've gone from the farm, which is about as natural as you can get, barring all of the technology. Let's talk about lab-based, because that's been getting a huge amount of press recently. And before I start, I just like to find out how many people on the phone have heard of So Lean. I'll give everybody a minute.
I don't know.
Okay. And then what So Lean is, just kind of curious, so hold tight, we're going to talk about it. It is probably the weirdest, arguably, and newest option, but this whole idea of food moving to the lab, it's not that labs haven't been part of food production. We all know that there are flavorists and chemical houses and that are involved to some degree with food production. The larger the production, the more likely that kind of activity is taking place. But as we all know, that's now amping up quite a bit, and we've got everything from lab-grown meats to printed foods. And originally the printed foods were cute little sugar cubes that looked neat, but what are you really going to do with it in the end other than display it at a food show? But that's not what's happening now. You've got food printing machines that are printing full hamburgers, that are printing all types of things, and while immediately your mind might go to this weird idea that we've got up here on the screen, the reality is that printed food can be quite beautiful and is allowing some culinarians to really rethink the way they are approaching plating and what food can be and how it can be used. And even labs involved with foods, they're beginning to create some serious solutions and options to consumers who are looking for alternatives. We know we started with, let's say, the nut milks, started with almond milk and soy milk, but now we've got Oatly, we've got all different types of nut milks, we've got grain milks. The company that's coming out with Oatly has just announced that they're coming out with a quinoa milk. And labs have also created a vegan ice cream that eats exactly like and tastes exactly like a dairy-based ice cream. So it's not that these are also ran options where you're compromising a lot just to get a non-dairy ice cream. These are as appealing to those of us who are willing to eat dairy as they are to people who are legitimately trying to avoid dairy. So they are real solutions that taste great, feel great, eat well, and we all know that Impossible Burger and Beyond Burger have changed the way not just vegans and vegetarians may want to eat, but the other options, the people who might want to cut back on meat but not necessarily leave it entirely, it's changing as well. Of course, they are ultra-processed right now, and there are nutritional concerns that are not necessarily top of mind with consumers but are probably going to become. But keep in mind that those are all 1.0, essentially, of this category of foods. Now, you want to take it one more step further. We're beginning to get into synthesized foods as well. There are companies in California that are synthesizing wine, that are synthesizing whiskey. These are essentially foods that have nothing natural, and by that I mean no grapes were involved in creating the synthesized wine. It is entirely a chemical-based process that is mimicking the mouthfeel and the flavor and the aroma of the wines that they are duplicating. In fact, this company in California, I believe it's Ava Wineries, they created a Dom Perignon. I can't remember which year it was, but it was like one of their best years. They actually mimicked it with a synthesized Dom Perignon. They had a group of experts come in, and only 2 out of 100 were able to tell the difference between the synthesized and the real thing. That's what that's getting. That's what that's getting to. And think about it from a manufacturer's point of view. If, let's say, you're Kraft Heinz and you've got Heinz ketchup, if a company could come in and synthesize Heinz ketchup down to the flavor, the look, the aroma, everything, what does a manufacturer have from an intellectual point of view, like an intellectual property point of view? They haven't stolen your recipe. They haven't stolen anything from you. They've literally just used chemicals to recreate the product that you created. Now, of course, there's going to be a backlash from some consumers who simply don't want to have any part of that kind of a product. But if you could create it at a lower price without the consumer having to sacrifice anything else that they want from a Heinz ketchup, what does that leave any manufacturer? Here's Solein. So if you really want to take this as far as you can down the rabbit hole, Solein is a real product. It's created by Solar Foods. I believe that they are a Finnish company that's also based, they've got another office, I think, in California. They are creating this whole protein. These are the images that are on the right and down at the bottom. That's what Solein looks like. It is a whole protein that is created from the air. It's hydrogen, electricity, and then a quote-unquote proprietary organism, which to me sounds a lot like Stranger Things. So I'm not sure if I'm entirely on board yet with the Solein idea. But this is a whole protein that can be added to food that is created from air. It is essentially the most sustainable protein product you could create. And this is what we could be coming to going down the line, and not very far down the line. Here is a beautiful dish. I think we all could say that this looked delicious, and we'd probably want it to try it if you were into meat and into sushi. This is a lab-created kangaroo meat from a company down in Australia. It had nothing to do with the animal. They got a couple of cells, so I guess it had originally something to do with the animal, but the animal didn't mind. They took a tiny little group of cells, created that. So think about this now. Originally, we started talking about lab-grown meats, and of course, the first thing was the cow and the chicken, and pork is probably going to be next. Australia, they've got kangaroo, which for them is as common as, let's say, deer is around here in Vermont. But what if you could start creating tiger meats? What if you could start creating meats from any other kind of endangered creature to create exotic meals without any creature ever being injured in any way, shape, or form? What if you combined the genes from these two and created tigeroo meat? Is that really outside the bounds of reality at this point, because it's all based in a lab? There's no breeding involved, no animals involved. And ultimately, if we could get, and this might sound ridiculous, if we could get enough cells from dinosaur bones, can we actually start creating dinosaur meats? And you might start laughing and think there's no way that could happen. But if I were to tell you 5 years ago that you could create protein out of the air, you'd probably laugh at that as well, but we're already there. So, think about the options as an operator or even a manufacturer you might end up having going down the road from an ingredient point of view, from a production point of view, and how that may or may not impact the environment, I think is a little bit, I know that there's a lot of talk about how it might be more earth-friendly. I'm not quite sure that the numbers are there yet, but think about what we can all create without necessarily the need for as much space. It's really kind of crazy when you think about where food is going to end up going, even in 5 years. We're not even talking 20 to 30 or 40 years.
Well, and really quick here, I just wanted to jump in there. Yesterday, I read a story. I'm going back a little bit here. I read a story about one of the U.S.'s top dairy manufacturers declaring bankruptcy. And
Dean Foods.
Obviously, it was funny because after I read it, just with my Cisco and my business resources hat on, right away went and checked to see the statistics. Well, cheese sales have skyrocketed, so it doesn't necessarily mean what was this company diversified. Who knows? Oat milk, on the other hand, again, although a smaller sample size at the amount that's being bought, 600% growth in the last over the same period of time. Now you start talking about how people are discussing about all these different types of foods that can be created and what are the debates that are going to be. But what about certifications too? Obviously, we were just talking about this with fish the other day, MSC, Oceanwise, blah, blah, blah. Things are being created. How can you even create a certification for something that's being created, right?
Exactly. And not just a certification to make sure that it's, number one, edible, and of course, safe. But then if you think about it from a meat point of view, do you even start creating a grading system? Do you have a prime cut of lab-grown meat?
Yes.
I mean, probably not now. It's a little early. Like, I think they're just lucky to get it done. But, once this starts advancing, yeah, absolutely, you'll have a grading system. Yeah, it's amazing. I find this stuff, I love talking about this stuff. All right, so let's talk about the democratization of food. Let's move away from the labs and some of the crazy technology. I think that probably one of the best things that's happened into the industry, even though it has significantly increased competition and created challenges of its own, but I think one of the really great things is the democratization of great food. And arguably that started with the food truck movement about 10 years ago, when you had fine dining chefs who were trying to create food that was better quality but more accessible to a far wider range of consumers than they ever were able to reach with their brick and mortar fine dining restaurants. So a lot of them moved into the food trucks, and then other operators who may not have been fine dining to begin with but were creating really interesting, unique, and good quality food also started moving into the same space. What that movement did, even though it's not quite as big as it was, at its zenith a few years ago, what it did was change the perception of consumers with regard to where great food was available from. It essentially took great food out of the sole control of fine dining operators and opened up consumers' ability to understand that it could be available anywhere. You don't have to go to a fine dining operator. Certainly fine dining operators still have amazing food. It's not that that's not the case, but great food is available from a lot of different spaces. So as we moved past that, you had all of this really interesting innovation happening from not just a food, but an operation standpoint, pop-up restaurants that were popping up not only in brick and mortar spaces that were empty, but anywhere. This is a really great example in, I believe this was Norway or Denmark. Actually, I think this was Denmark, where it's just in a public square. They just set up this really interesting and unique operation. Then you had food halls, and while food halls have been around in different types of food markets, this idea that you could take a space that was a warehouse or a broken down building in an area that nobody had been to and create this unbelievable draw with a wide variety of great food from local operators, I think that was simply the next iteration of this idea. Of course, we've seen quick service and convenience stores begin to offer better and better food. I mean, if you had told anyone 15 years ago that sushi would be available from convenience stores, they would absolutely have laughed because there was no way you would consider eating it. But great sushi can be available from convenience stores now. Actually, as an example, so I live in Vermont and often go to upstate New York, which if you haven't been there, there's not a lot in upstate New York once you get away from the Hudson River. And we were driving in the middle of nowhere, no kidding. We stopped at a gas station and they had an Indian buffet going on at this gas station in the middle of upstate New York, which I don't know the demographics of that area, but I'll go out on a limb to say it was 90% white. So, that's really interesting that kind of stuff is happening now. You had the grocerant movement was not only improving the quality of the food at the grocery store, but the grocery stores were creating these really interesting restaurant-style options. Here, this was in Chicago at Mariano's. They had for a while, I think they've gotten rid of it out of some of the stores, but an oyster bar in a supermarket. And they had it was essentially like a little food market of its own. Now that democratization has expanded even more, and you're getting companies that have not been in the food space entering the food space pretty aggressively. One of the best examples is Amazon buying Whole Foods. You've got Taco Bell opening up hotels. You've got Capital One opening up cafes. So everyone and anyone is entering the food space. Now, that's not to say that all of them are going to be offering great food, but the fact that consumers now are open to the idea that they can get great food at a Capital One cafe and are willing to go there presents great opportunities in the industry, expands the potential, but it also creates unbelievable competition for any operator already in the space. You're not just competing with your fellow restaurateurs, you are now competing with almost everyone and anyone who wants to set up a kitchen anywhere and in any way. So that certainly has put a lot of pressures on the industry. Add to that, of course, you also have the meal kits, which all of those companies are struggling. So it's certainly not that probably the meal kits like Blue Apron and Plated and those will continue on the way they were. A lot of them have been bought actually by grocery stores. But this idea that consumers may want to participate a bit in the meal, but not necessarily do all of it from scratch or by themselves or even go shopping. This idea that there are solutions that can be made to address some of these issues, and then, of course, supported by the move toward delivery, which we'll talk about. All of this is just going to, again, really change what food is. So one of the biggest changes now in the industry is that, you know, for any of us who've been in the industry for any length of time, you're always taught that there are essentially now four commercial segments: fast food, quick service, fast casual, mid-scale family dining, and casual dining, and fine dining. So 5 segments, 5 primary segments. How do you even apply those segments anymore when you have chef casual and fine casual and casual fine dining and micro restaurants and upscale diners? And, you know, how do you start placing all of these new formats? And this idea of ghost restaurants alone is really, really interesting how that's going to be applied by operators who are trying to leverage the delivery space, are trying to maximize back of house efficiencies, make sure that their kitchen is working for them and creating revenue even during downtimes. It's not the ghost restaurants or even commissary style operations are only new restaurants, but there are plenty of chains now that are looking to figure out, if I've got these restaurants and the kitchens are sitting there doing nothing, why not create a ghost brand that exists only with the third-party delivery systems and just simply hands food out through the back door, if you will, while you still are maintaining your primary brand out the front. So, I mean, it's a really, really fascinating time. It's challenging as an operator, there's no doubt about it, but it's a fascinating time for food. And just to give you an idea of how blurred the lines are becoming, this is a beautiful restaurant. It's in Portland, so if you know it, don't say anything yet. But if you looked at this, you'd think, okay, well, this is based on all the visual cues. It's kind of casual, right? You've got casual stools, casual seating, metal tables. You know, it looks like maybe a coffee shop, but this is the food that's coming out of that restaurant. It's Kachka. It's a Russian restaurant in Portland, and the quality of the food is absolutely fine dining, even though the space itself is very, very, very casual, very casual.
And I just want to jump in here. I'm looking up at the top. I'm not Russian, but I have some lineage through my Mennonite roots, and I'm looking at, like, what did you do to my borscht? The top right corner there, and the beets, right. And but okay, so our minds are flowing, everything's just going on. So really quick, just a personal plug for everybody that's on the call. Make sure if you aren't on the chat side, Jay has been dropping in a lot of links to a lot of the stuff that Maeve's been talking about. So again, just like all these websites, if you guys want to learn a little bit more about them, all the data is there on the side. And then again, just back to that slide, the one before the restaurant, about the 9 boxes. Like, 15 years ago, did you say maybe 4? Was there 4 boxes?
I mean, originally there was only the 4 because fast casual didn't exist. Then fast casual came and it got its own. But I don't think 5 is even relevant anymore, to be honest with you. I don't think you can legitimately fit all of these new formats reasonably and intuitively into only 5 segments now.
Yeah. So I think
it makes it hard
everybody's mind, because even one of the reps that I'm with today, we've just been talking about, like, it's just not about cooking food anymore. There is a very competitive business side that, you know, not only understanding this, but how to go get, like, how do I get these people? Like you just said, at an Indian buffet in a non-traditional demographic area, like, where are you getting that data from? Like, where, you know, like, so anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, you're absolutely right. And the speed, and, you know, and we'll see, at least in the U.S., if recession actually does happen. You know, there's a lot of conflicting data as to whether or not we're going to move into a recession. Yep. But we could see an enormous shakeup again, should we actually fall into a recession. If not, then we're going to see an incredibly crowded field become even more and more crowded, and we'll have to wait to see where, you know, essentially it all goes. Okay, so thinking about this food, this is coming from that restaurant we just talked about. Let's talk about the shifting role of food in food service. And that might seem odd because obviously we're in food service to serve food, but the role of food is actually changing significantly. So these are all beautiful images, all very different, different styles, kind of coming at food from a different point of view in each picture. But I think we could all say that they all look delicious. These are all foods now that are available at stadiums in the U.S. And when I'm saying stadiums, I mean baseball, football, basketball stadiums. This is the kind of food you can now get when you're going to, a sport game, a concert, whatever it is. Food is no longer what we meant. Well, I'm Gen X. I'll speak for myself. What I grew up with when I went to see a baseball game, at least in the U.S. And so food is completely changing our expectations and what we are even looking for from an experience outside of the traditional restaurant format. You've got eaterants in particular, and these are all different slides, things like Topgolf, Fork and Screen, AMC, Pinstripes. I mean, there's a huge number of them now operating. All of them supposedly came at the industry from an entertainment point of view. They were bowling alleys, movie theaters, golf places. But the reality is food is an enormous part of their identity. It's an enormous part of the experience that you have there. And you're going there, many people, for the food as much as the entertainment. And in some cases, I think it was Pinstripe that I read about, I think that was it, a couple of years ago, said that their food sales are going to well outpace any of their entertainment sales. So the reality is that food is a huge part of that, and these are all images from entertainment restaurants.
Did we lose Maeve, Jay? Everybody just hang tight. Hang tight, everybody. Sometimes this happens. We may just be waiting for her to load, or maybe just her audio.
No, because the screen's
Yeah.
not changing.
Yeah, the screen's not changing either.
Hi, can everybody hear me again?
There you are! Yay!
I know. I don't know what just happened. My phone started
It's
beeping
technology.
at me.
Yeah, it's technology. We can see the slide. All good.
Okay, so as I'm talking about high tech, I get booted off of my own webinar. That's
No, it's not you.
comforting.
Don't worry. Don't worry.
Okay, so I'm back. All right. So thanks everybody for hanging in there. I apologize for the slight delay. All right, so we're talking about entertainment. Here, so, those kind of changes, there are a lot of food changes happening, but at airports are a great example of the shifting role of food. Here are three of huge airports, Newark, Kennedy, and O'Hare. These are all images of operations that are now in these airports. And I think we could all agree that it's not just the food that they're offering, and they're all offering different types of food now, but the design of these places is gorgeous. They could exist outside of the airport. There are no longer those weird kiosks with the pre-wrapped sandwiches that you're all a little, sketched out potentially by how long they may have been sitting there. I mean, these are places you feel comfortable sitting down at, and you feel like you're having a great experience, even though it happens to be in an airport. Airports are now using food as a lure for travelers, not just on layovers so that they're spending more money, but to get to the airport earlier. And I know a lot of friends who travel quite a bit who are actually planning trips around the food available at the different layovers that they might have or locations, and they're getting to the airport earlier specifically to try out operations there, which I don't think would have ever happened 10 years ago.
Well, and to be clear, I don't know if that wave has hit Canada yet, but we are definitely jealous. We are jealous of our American and international counterparts. Although I shouldn't say I don't travel as much as my peers. I do know that some of the bigger centers, we are definitely seeing this happen. And one of our teammates just posted in, she saw Uber Eats at the airport last week. So like it is, the boundaries are gone. Boundaries are gone.
Yeah. They are, absolutely. In fact, I was just at an airport conference earlier in the year, and I want to say that Vancouver Airport is going through an enormous redesign.
Yeah.
And they were showing some of it. It's going to be gorgeous. So go to Vancouver at the very least for right now. Then you should have this.
Well, and I'm hearing Toronto apparently as well, and I'm also hearing Calgary now, and then obviously, yeah, like you said, Vancouver as well. So.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking about the changing role of food, in some cases, operations that have never been food forward and aren't entirely food forward now are now using food as a lure and a benefit of membership. This is the United secret restaurants called. Oh boy, the name just flew out of my head. Anyway, you have to be a United.
It's a secret. You're not supposed to know.
It is. I've actually been there though. I can't remember it.
Jay, find us the name of the link.
Yeah, Jay, get on that. So you have to be a frequent flyer. You have to fly to a certain amount, and then you are invited to come into the restaurant. So you can't even find it. It's the craziest thing. It's like going to a speakeasy. You have to go through a restaurant and back to the kitchen and then through a secret door, and then this is where you end up. It's a gorgeous restaurant. The food that they serve is over here on the left. This is a benefit of being a member at an airline now. So food is now changing the way an airline is thinking about creating benefits for its membership. Another great example of operators who are rethinking the role of food are hotels. Hotels are completely shifting the game. There have been a number of articles recently about how hotels are now using food as benefits to their members, as lures to the location. This is Bird and Bottle from a hotel out in California. This is their room service spread. So this is what you get in your own room when you order dinner. Why would you go to a restaurant if you can sit in your pajamas and have this kind of a meal brought directly to you? I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. The Chicago, and a lot of hotels are also facing the same kind of competitive challenges that the rest of the restaurants are facing. They've got Uber Eats and all the third-party delivery options. They've got all kinds of restaurants that are all over the place. And many of them are trying to fight it by creating better food options on site that the hotel directly benefits from. In other cases, hotels like the Chicago Athletic Association in Chicago, they have a Shake Shack downstairs in the hotel. Rather than fight it, they have offered Shake Shack delivery up to the room. Your guests are going to want it. They might not want to leave the room, so why not make their experience better by facilitating the experience that they're going to want anyway? So that's another way to look at it. Sticking with the Chicago Athletic Association, hotels are also activating all of their public spaces, from the lobbies to the rooftops. They are trying to figure out ways to create these activated public spaces that become new revenue generators for them. This is the lobby space at the CAA. It's absolutely beautiful. The unique thing about this is not only can you order food and alcoholic as well as non-alcoholic beverages anywhere in the lobby. It's got a full-time server. They have locals who come here and use it essentially like a Starbucks. So you've got locals who will come here and work for hours and hours and hours. And now these are new draws and new ways for hotels to gain membership, gain loyalty, and increase revenue. At the Moxie brand, which is a Marriott banner, they actually have eliminated the reception desk. The reception desk now is the bar in most of their locations. So when you're checking into the Moxie, you go up to the bar, you not only check in, but you get a welcome cocktail. And this idea that you can use food and cocktails as a gift for simply being there is not new, but it's ramping up, particularly the welcome cocktails, which I think were more common overseas than they were necessarily to begin with or for a while here in the States. But I would argue that the welcome cocktails that started abroad and have moved here are part of what has helped fuel this non-alcoholic beverage innovation. Because if you have a lot of guests from a lot of different areas of the world, a lot of different areas of the country with different backgrounds, whether it's religious, ethical, or whatnot, they're not necessarily looking for an alcoholic welcome beverage. And so hotels need to offer an equally beneficial, equally exciting, equally welcoming cocktail that does not include alcohol, and they helped spur this whole new thinking behind what a non-alcoholic beverage could be beyond a Shirley Temple or an Arnold Palmer or something. Here's another great example. This is a mini bar at a hotel, again in California. Everything is fresh. This is the mini bar. This is what you get when you come into your hotel room. Now, this might not be realistic for all hotels, but you get what I'm saying here about rethinking what any of this can be for the guests. It all needs to fit within your operation and how you approach your guests and what the brand identity of the property is. But I think there are all kinds of new ways to rethink what food can be depending on what your operation is. And as a last image, this is Rivertown Lodge in Hudson, New York. This is their honor bar out in the middle of the hallway. Nobody mans this. You just hopefully tell them what you get. All of it is locally sourced, and the direction that they've gone is everything is priced at the exact same price as any shop you'd find this at anywhere outside of the hotel. So there's no more thinking of being price gouged and a captive audience, and as a result, they actually have much better sales from any of this than you might find at other hotel, stores where the prices are much higher. And so, people might be more inclined. Sorry, one last thing. And I do love this. Speaking of how food can be used as a tool by an operation, this is the JW Marriott. I believe this is in Minneapolis.
Wow.
And what they do, they monitor the guests who have checked in. They monitor their social activity, their social networking activity. If any of them leave a good review for the hotel or comment about the hotel while they're staying there, the hotel employees whip up these cookies. The social media icon that they have used, in this case Facebook, will be on the cookie, and then it's slipped into their room as a thank you for posting. So not only are you acknowledging what your guests have done for you, you are now encouraging them to do it more, because every time they do it, they get a new cookie. Who doesn't love that? All right, so I know we only have about 10 minutes left, so I promise I'm going to go fast. I
just wanted to put something in there about like you're doing a great job and you got amazing visuals, but the one thing that I'm finding, especially recently, is people's level of comfort with asking for feedback and surveying. What a lot of people, and maybe I shouldn't say a lot of people, what I feel that maybe some people that would be listening to this or that'll listen to the recording, which by the way will be hosted on Cisco Canada's YouTube channel, this is all data-based. All this information that Maeve's sharing with us today is data-based. So these questions have been asked and the segments have been, like, there's really strong data. And so the same thing goes for businesses. You've got to ask your customers. It's not about, well, none of this fits for me. It's about, when was the last time you asked your customers if you are missing something, right? So I just wanted to throw that in there because there's so much beautiful data here today.
Yeah, and by no means is there ever going to be one size fits all, whether you're a hotel operator joining or a restaurant joining. All of this is to give you different ways of thinking about solving problems that you're addressing, different ways of keeping your guests engaged, different ways of starting communications, improving your relationships with your patrons, different ways of approaching your operation, and even making your operation a better revenue generator and even profit maker for you. So none of these will be a perfect fit for everyone on the phone, but hopefully they're all making you think in different ways about how to approach the problems and the issues that you might be currently facing, and maybe different angles and different directions to come at those issues. All right, so delivery. There are all kinds of ways to deliver. I don't think anybody on the phone is surprised that delivery is huge. I do want to know, of anybody on the phone, who is offering delivery? I'll just give it a minute. Okay. So far it's either yes or considering it. This is a tricky one. I mean, delivery, it's certainly a hot topic. It's certainly a hot button issue. A lot of operators are jumping into it, arguably jumping into it potentially too fast without thinking through. Delivery is certainly a great potential revenue source, but from a profit margin point of view, it can be a challenge depending on how you've prepared for it and the degree to which you've thought through how it's going to work for your operation. And then adding into the mix, the third-party delivery groups, they take their own chunk. In many cases, it's about 30% of what you're selling. So we all know that restaurants have a very tight margin to begin with. Somebody takes 30% of your revenue, that could eliminate any kind of margin you were even thinking you might be able to make. And you also lose control, and we'll talk about that as well. But delivery is it's going to change the way everything looks on the street, from all the bots that are going to be on the ground to all the bots that are going to be in the air. I mean, it might be dangerous just walking out of your house if you live in a city at this point for all of the automated cars and bots and aero whatever. But you've even got operators who are trying to rethink their role when it comes to facilitating delivery, and Domino's was actually repaving streets to get rid of potholes to ensure that the food, now granted, that's a little extreme. You want to talk about one size does not fit all. I'm not saying everybody needs to go and start, helping the ground crew, the road crew. But when we talk about the third-party delivery guys taking away control, this is a real-life security camera image of an Uber Eats driver whose face has now been blurred to protect the guilty, eating out of the bag. The next image out of this whole thing is him handing that bag over to the individual who just ordered it. You're not only losing control of who's handling it from a food safety point of view, but the minute that food leaves your operation, you're losing control over the quality, the consistency, the experience, and then ultimately your brand identity and the satisfaction that your guests will have from that. Most guests will blame the restaurant, not the third-party delivery operator, if the food is cold, if it doesn't look good, if it's spilled all over the bag, if the order is wrong. It's not going to be them that are blamed, it's going to be you. And that's a real challenge. It's easier to go with them right off the bat because they take care of all the different aspects of getting the food to the place, but there are a lot of real challenges. There are solutions. I think this whole packaging and food safety thing is going to be one of the biggest issues that has not yet been addressed, but needs to be addressed. Who has access to that food once it leaves your operation? There have been countless social media, viral things where people have gotten ribs, where all the ribs but one have been eaten and then thrown back in there, where food has been handled clearly and eaten out of. So there are packaging options that are being developed where they're trying to create security from when the food leaves your kitchen to when it actually gets to the patron. On the left is a very simple where it's just a seal, a tape seal, and if that ends up getting broken, obviously that means somebody's been in there. On the right, that's a little bit more of a technical solution, but of course here you're also getting into some environmental issues, so packaging is going to become a big deal. And then on top of all of that, delivery, the minute you start handing your delivery off to one of these third-party delivery groups, you're also handing a lot of data on your patrons over to them that you're not necessarily getting back in the end. Delivery can tell you a lot about your patrons' behavior, foods that are doing well, whether they're satisfied with what they're getting, how often they're ordering, and all of the AI that could go into improving the delivery experience is now owned by the third-party delivery provider. So that idea of big data that Foodservice has talked about for a very long time is now shifting from food service operators into these third-party delivery providers. And then getting toward the end here, I'm going to move through this one really fast. Tech. Instagram, we all know that Instagram has completely changed food. In some cases, the way Instagram has changed food service is a little odd. This is Sketch in London, arguably one of the most Instagram bathrooms that has ever been. The idea that you're designing bathrooms now to be photographed is where Instagram has gone a bit wrong for restaurants. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be in a bathroom with somebody with a camera. But that being said, Instagram has certainly created some really unique food options, but some of these food options, though amazingly Instagrammable, are almost inedible from any kind of reasonable point of view. How do you actually eat a piece of cake on top of a milkshake without getting it all over yourself, all over your table from an operator point of view? And if you look on the right-hand side with this milkshake that's got all the fireworks, that kind of speaks to the shift that we're seeing. For those of you who might not have heard of this, ASMR is Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response. It's that thing where you get the tingle back down your neck if you end up hearing certain noises. That's really the shift. Technology is changing food in more ways than we can really count in this, from apps that allow you to have your face put on the foam of a cappuccino, if that's your thing, to facial recognition that will eliminate your need to look through a menu at an operator that you might be familiar with. It'll just pull up all of your favorite items the minute you walk in, and it recognizes your face. I mean, it's going to completely change how operators interface with their patrons. You've got beacon technology, which is being used very effectively by hotels and increasingly by restaurants, where they can welcome you back before you even got in the door and tell you what kind of food. You can order your food before you get there. We're already beginning to talk about Uber personalization. This is the extreme version where we might all be hooked up to different little mini computers. You just scan that and a restaurant can customize the dish to your personal nutrition needs. And that is a question that I have for everybody. Do you think that ultra personalization of food and nutrition, this idea that food is going to be designed for the individual based on their individual nutrition needs rather than broader issues, do you think that's a fad or a trend? I think we're getting to the end. I might be losing people.
Well, no.
All right.
I don't think it's that. I think it just, you're just
there we go.
everybody's minds with the data that you're sharing.
Yeah, I see a lot of fads and not sures. I would say it's difficult. I think the idea of ultra-personalization is a trend, but it's not something that can be easily commercialized and easily ramped up for a restaurant. If you've got thousands and thousands of patrons, how do you design a menu that's only for one person in particular? So it's something that I think the food industry manufacturers will be able to address in very interesting ways. Some niche operators might, but it's going to be hard for mass marketing. And just to really bring this to the nth degree, Samsung has, they've actually trademarked a smart contact lens. So imagine if you're a maitre d' at a restaurant or a hostess, you've got this lens in, you can see across the room, a guy at a table, his blood pressure is going up, he may be dissatisfied with his meal experience. That allows the hostess to approach that person before they've even had a chance to complain, to proactively address the problem. As somebody else walks in the restaurant, you recognize them because their face is recognized based on their social profile. You can greet them by name, and they might be a first-time patron. I mean, the degree to which technology will change the way we're all dealing with each other, dealing with patrons, and how patrons are dealing with us is really mind-blowing where it's going to go. And then I promise this is the last section. So Gen Z. We've all been talking about millennials ad nauseum. I know I'm ready to move on. No offense to the millennials. So it's time to say goodbye to the millennials. They've had their big impact, and they have impacted the industry in immense ways. Gen Z is where it's at now. And the last question I have for everybody, do you think that your operation needs to make changes to appeal to Gen Z? Is that something that's on your radar?
It is for me.
Yeah, a lot of yeses. And that's for a good reason, to be honest with you, just to get everybody onto the same page, because there's often a question, who is Gen Z? We've been throwing around all these cohorts. Gen Z is essentially the youngest group. They are, and the definitions vary. There's no set definition. The government does not define these generations. It's essentially anybody from age 0 to 21. This is based on Pew research, and you can see how the other generations stack up. Another way to look at it, this is from census data, slightly different. It's up to 24 years, but you can see how big that group is. They are 30. This was from the 2018 census in the U.S. They were 32%, 1/3 of the population in 2018. They're expected to be 40% of the population by 2020. 56% of Gen Z are under 14 years old, and 75% of them are over 18. I think those numbers are off, so I'm going to have to find out what the heck's going on there. But anyway, they're an enormous group. They are incredibly diverse. About half of them are not Caucasian. Again, these are U.S. numbers. So they are the most diverse generation that will ever, has ever been in this country. Hopefully not, will ever be. And that means that there are a lot of different perceptions. They've got a much broader comfort zone. They've got a much broader sense of the world and an understanding of where they fit in it. But, thinking about the ages, where so many of them are under the age of 14 years old, we need to be careful when we're talking about them, whether or not we're talking about characteristics that are specific to that generation, in that they define Gen Z and no other generation, or if it's more a matter of how young they are. So if they like sweet things now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be pro-sweet going forward. They're young, right? But the fact that they grew up during, after September 11th, that they have a heightened sense of economic security because of the recession that they lived through, those are generationally specific characteristics that will stick with them and impact their behavior going forward. I would also say to everybody on the phone, as you're listening to researchers talk about Gen Z, be careful when they say to you, this is exactly how they're going to be going forward. Count on it, because they are primarily under the age of 18 years old. And I don't think any of us are the same as we were then. They're going to change significantly once they get to college, once they start making money. So if anybody tells you, here's what this generation is like, count on it and don't expect any changes, be very cautious of the information that they're providing you, because they're going to change quite a bit. Yeah.
We're tight for time. That was a great finish, by the way. Thank you. And again, data backed. I love it. Really quickly, they can get a hold of you on your website, right? If they need to get. Right?
Let me get all the way to the back.
Okay.
Here. And thanks, everybody. I apologize that we ran out of time. So much stuff, and there was a really great conversation. But if you have any questions, here you go. There you go. So anybody, please feel free to email me, call me. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I apologize we ran out of time for questions.
Don't apologize.
But I'm happy to do it.
Keep it tight, and obviously,
Totally.
You got our minds turning. Will we have access to your slides? Is that something you'll be able to share with us?
Yeah, I did send them to you and Jay, so feel free to send them on to anybody who participated or anybody who's interested in them. And again, I'm happy to answer questions after the webinar.
Perfect. Head on over to Cisco Canada's YouTube channel. We will have this presentation uploaded there in a short period of time. It does take a little bit to upload them. Our next one coming up is with Abby Sharp out of Toronto on the plant-based diet, and so make sure you look out for that one. But thank you so much, Maeve. Just the data that you shared, just mind-blowing, and just the comments that you'll be able to see them after. Just how you stretched everybody's minds today. We really appreciate it. And can't wait to work with you in the future.
Oh, likewise. Thank you, everybody. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks to everybody that took the time to be part of this today. We really appreciate your time and look forward to connecting with everybody again. Signing out.
Thank you.
Kevin, Maeve Webster, Jay Ashton. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.